Welcome to today's edition of the Rush 24/7 podcast.
The views expressed by the host on this program have riveted the nation. The views expressed by the host on this program are heard in the White House. And it's about damn time for that, too.
Live from the Southern Command in sunny South Florida, it's Open Line Friday!
Yes, sirree, wrapping up a busy broadcast week. There isn't any downtime. There's no letdown. And we're going to be here on Monday, by the way. It's President's Day, but I decided that I'm going to be here. So we're going to be here. Open Line Friday means that you can talk about whatever you want to talk about. It doesn't have to be what everybody else is talking about. It can be anything. 800-282-2882 if you want to be on the program. The email address, lrushbo@eibnet.us. I can also confirm that on Sunday I will be appearing on Fox News Sunday with Chris Wallace. And as of now, and anything can happen. Anything can happen. I could end up getting broomed. I doubt that. I think they would broom others before they broom me. But you never know. I mean, anything can happen. As of now, I am scheduled probably the second segment of the program, 12 to 13 minutes is the length of the segment. And I must ask all of you to understand something. 12 to 13 minutes for me is just warming up to a topic. And Chris wants to talk about 4 or 5, maybe 6 things in that 12 or 13 minutes. It may be necessary for him to interrupt me. I promised him that I'm going to be as brief as I can, that I'm going to practice over the weekend. They're laughing. I'm going to practice over the weekend, really getting in, getting it, and getting out. That's all I need. In fact, I may get up a half hour early and just rehearse on Sunday before I get in here. But I really am. I'm gonna be, because he gets worried when he has to interrupt me. He hears from you all who accuse him of being unfair to me and interrupting me and not letting me finish. Right when I'm about to hit the zinger, he will ask a question, in your opinion, and then he gets more emails than he gets any other time. And I wanted to give him papal dispensation here, that the interruptions that he makes are not intended to do anything but move the program along. And I told him I'm going to help him out. And as I say, I'm going to be practicing brevity. Because as Shakespeare said, brevity is the soul of wit. So as of now, it's the second I'm assuming I'm always the second segment. They'll start the program with some White House or other government guest. And then we'll get to me. And I keep telling him, you know what you ought to do is have me on and then have me in the round table to discuss me. Because, that's what's going to happen. Nobody's ever done that before. I probably would be able to add even more insight to what I said, commenting on what I said. It would be a television first. Has ever been done? A guest then ends up in the panel commenting on what the guest previously said. Someday it may happen. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it was predictable, the reaction to President Trump's press conference yesterday. And it really is hilarious. The drive-bys are still having kittens over the way Trump called them out for their fake news. And yet they continue to publish fake news articles today. The big one, you ready for this? The AP reported that Trump is on the verge of calling up 100,000 National Guard troops to start rounding up illegal aliens and throwing them out of the country. I saw the story big when I got in here today. It was headlined above the folded Drudge. So I clicked on it and I read it. And I thought, this doesn't make any sense. I mean, it didn't compute. And lo and behold, it's made up. What it was, according to the White House, Trump hasn't even seen it. It's part of the sausage making that goes on in every governmental department. Like the Pentagon has all kinds of operational plans for various circumstances that may happen in the future. And you have these battle plans ready to go, and they're constantly revised. Commanders are asking their underlings to come up with various plans, and memos are flying back and forth. And 99.9% of them never become policy, and they're never acted upon. It's just part of the way bureaucracies operate. And the White House does the same thing. And apparently this was a low-level memo that had been asked for by somebody in some department to deal with what might be a big emergency down the road. Something was never seriously considered to be anything. You know, it's like that story that the Wall Street Journal ran yesterday morning with their big news alert on Wednesday night. And that is that the intelligence community has decided to withhold information from President Trump because, A, they're not confident he won't share it with his friends, the Russians, and B, he's so incompetent and dangerous we can't trust the nation's secrets to the commander-in-chief. And that was the essence of the story. And they ran with it, and then they ran with it on Thursday after the alert on Wednesday night, and we later found out that there was literally nothing to this. And we've had the director of the Office of National Intelligence deny it. Mike Pompeo, the new director of CIA, has denied it. It didn't happen. There's no, and intelligence agents would not do something like this, we're being assured. What the truth was, and this is, I mean, it's incredible. And this is a great illustration of how fake news is operating today. It turns out that intelligence people and agencies and operatives are constantly feeding intel to the various department heads. You've got agents in the field, and you have analysts in the office, and they're making reports, producing reports on what's coming in, and not nearly all of it ever gets presented to the president. Very little of it ends up in a presidential daily brief. And so since you have the root of the story, there's intel not given to the president. Somebody called the Wall Street Journal and said, you know what? We're not sharing intel with the president. Well, yeah, 99.9% of it is never shared. There's no news here. What there was a brand new narrative created. It was totally fake. That took a grain of truth and expanded it to a total falsehood and fakery to make it look like something new was happening with intelligence in this country when nothing new is happening. And this kind of thing continues today. This National Guard story is almost exactly the same kind of story with the same routing as that Wall Street Journal story on the fact that Trump is so dangerous. And by the way, this idea that the Trump people were working with the Russians to sabotage Hillary, that is not going to go away. There are even more news reports today suggesting that there's literally no evidence. In fact, CNN, I'm going to get to this in more detail when the program unfolds. CNN, of all places, has a report that after all of this, the FBI does not believe that Flynn lied to them about anything regarding the phone call that he had with the Russian ambassador. In other words, there's no there. In other words, nothing. They can't find any evidence that there was any collusion at all. There's no evidence the Russians tampered with the votes. None. Zilch, zero. There aren't even any serious allegations about that. There are no serious allegations, and there is no evidence the Russians had anything to do with the actual voting process in this country. Zilch, zero, nada. There is no evidence that Trump colluded with the Russians on their efforts to expose what was going on in Podesta's email and the Democrat National Committee computer network. They can't find any evidence, and yet the narrative of that story continues to be what is driving the media and the Democrat Party's efforts to get rid of Donald Trump. That the Russians hacked the election, that the Russians impacted the outcome of the election, that Trump was in contact with the Russians during the campaign, but that there's no evidence. But it doesn't mean, they say, that there's still not something there. And it's all of this fakery continues to drive all of these other fake narratives. And that's why a bunch of journalists stood up and said, can you promise us that you had no contact with Russian officials during the election? None. I don't know. Nobody. During the election? I mean during the election. Can you promise? Can you? Story's been asked and answered for months. They continue to ask about it. What they're hoping for now is that somebody makes a mistake, says something different from what they said previously, which would then constitute deception or a lie, and that they can then zero in on them. So there is no plan to deploy 100,000 National Guard troops somewhere throughout America to find illegal aliens and throw them over the wall, throw them over the fence. There is no such operation. But my guess is, the genie's out of the bottle on that. You never know how many people saw the original story and still think that it is operative. Let's go to audio soundbite. Let's see, 1 and 2. Remember the name Tony Shaffer? Tony Shaffer, former CIA analyst. And he was on a Fox Business Network program called Risk and Reward, Elizabeth McDonald, the host. And they were talking about the resignation of Michael Flynn. This was Wednesday night. And Elizabeth McDonald said there have been leaks about phone calls between the president and leaders of Australia and Mexico, as well as the investigation into the Russian alleged interference and the hacks into the DNC. Are leaks by Obama officials a problem?
Absolutely, and I put this right at the feet of John Brennan and Jim Clapper, and I would even go so far as say the White House was directly involved before they left. I'd put this at Ben Rhodes and those folks. Let's be clear on this. I've watched this very carefully, the coverage, and when you have NBC reporting that they've talked to 6 officials who have seen the transcript, someone is basically giving away both sensitive methods, the fact that they read a communication that was intercepted by sensitive methods, and more importantly, that they're saying that they saw this information which was beyond top secret, which tells me that clearly someone had to have access to that, and that is a key issue.
I just want you to understand what this is. This is Tony Shaffer, a former CIA analyst, saying that it is Obama officials in the shadow government who are leaking all of this. We know that Obama and his team were investigating Trump all through the campaign. But I want to take you back to, I think it was September last year, where Barack Obama assured everyone that the White House put out a bunch of statements. I think Obama even said it on TV, that the Russians were not did not have and were not having any kind of an impact whatsoever on the election and on American voting. And they did this for a host of reasons. They wanted to, make it look like that they're fully competent and aware of things, and they didn't. They expected Hillary to win this, folks. You go back to September, you go back to August, you go back to October. They expected Hillary Clinton to win this in a landslide. The last thing they wanted was anybody thinking the Russians were helping her. They didn't want Hillary's win to be tainted in any way. So Obama very publicly reminded everybody that these stories about the Russians hacking were not having any effect whatsoever. And despite having said that and saying that, Obama and his team began investigating Trump during the campaign over all of the so-called Russian ties because you tell me why. If they expected Hillary to win in a landslide and they didn't want her win to be tainted by supposedly being held by the Russians, why were they investigating Trump? Why were they investigating Trump and these supposed ties to the Russians? There has to be an answer to that question, and it's, if you ask me, the answer could be nefarious, and I could probably come up with it with a couple of blind stabs in the dark as to what they were doing. You might say, well, they had to cover themselves. Maybe Hillary blows up and loses, and they have a way to discredit Trump's win for the sake of the Democrat Party, not just Hillary. But regardless, they have been my point is they have been investigating Trump and his alleged tie and his campaign's ties to the Russians all during the campaign for the purposes of messing with the election. And there's no evidence, folks. Nobody's produced any evidence. And the FBI finally, they've heard the transcript of the Flynn call, which Mr. Schaefer here was just talking about. That transcript should be released because it's being cherry-picked now. It's being excerpted, much the way 60 Minutes edits interviews. It's being cherry-picked. That transcript could be fully released. People have heard it. Look, there's nothing. Flynn didn't do anything here. I mean, we can't find any evidence whatsoever. In other words, CNN's reporting that Flynn may not even be charged with anything here. That's how little they've got. They got a scalp. But they don't have a shred of evidence that this election was anything other than above board. And here's Mr. Schaefer now acknowledging that Obama deep state operatives are the ones leaking all this stuff. Let's take a break as Open Line Friday continues to unfold. We'll be right back after this. One more bite from Tony Schaefer again this Wednesday night on the Fox Business Network with Elizabeth McDonald. She said, would you support a bipartisan push about Republicans and Democrats demanding an independent probe into Flynn? Do you support that?
Oh, yeah, because the fingers that they're going to be finding are pointing back at the former White House and some Democrats. The Democrats have been behind this, and I would go so far to say some of the Republicans have also been involved in some of the leaks. So bring it on. I think it's a good idea, and I think like we saw in the Detroit recount when they were recounting Michigan's votes, turned out to be voter fraud in all these Democrat precincts. I think it's what we're going to find here, so go right ahead.
So he's saying don't be afraid, even if it's a bipartisan investigation into Flynn, because what they're going to find out is who did it. And they're going to find all these Obama career people in the deep state, in the bureaucracy, the unelected portions of the bureaucracy, just like when Jill Stein went out, started her recount to try to prove that there was election fraud. They found out that it was Trump who had been cheated out of votes, not Hillary. Now, there are some Republicans that are sounding like they want a joint investigation of Flynn. And I don't think they should be confused with Schaefer here. The Republicans that are joining this idea, we need to have a serious congressional investigation, but they think that Flynn's done something wrong and they're into a CYA mode. It's typical. It's not all the Republicans. I think Walter Jones in North Carolina is one, but these guys, you know, they live the formula that Republicans have lived in Washington for all these many years, and that is constantly on defense. They're always in their minds going to lose. And when the media gets this fevered about something, you don't stand up to them. You cave. You go along with it just to keep yourself out of the crosshairs. And Schaefer's saying, yeah, I don't mind an investigation, but I'm not afraid of it for that reason. I think we'll find out who actually was behind all of this, because it's illegal. And he clearly expects that a legitimate investigation would expose many of the Obama holdovers that are actually engaging in an effort to sabotage the Trump presidency. And the media is fully on board with that. Try this headline, New York Post, it's a bloodbath at the State Department. This is an excellent bit of news. Hang on, folks. Now, just checking a late arriving alert that I got here that I wasn't able to read the whole thing because the program is now resumed. Welcome back, my friends. Open Line Friday. Rush Limbaugh at 800-282-2882. The New York Post has the story that Rex Tillerson, a new Secretary of State, is cleaning house at the State Department. According to a report, staffers in the offices of the Deputy Secretary of State for Management and Resources, as well as counselor, were shown the door yesterday, according to CBS News. Many of those let go were on the building's 7th floor. That's where the big shots offices are, the top floor. a symbolically important sign to the rest of the diplomatic corps that their new boss has different priorities than the last one. The staffing changes came as Tillerson was on his first foreign trip, attending a G20 meeting in Bonn, Germany. I don't know that this has happened to this extent in the time I have been paying attention to what goes in Washington. You know, folks, about the State Department, I have to admit that for much of even my adult life, I have had a naivete about me. And despite what is clearly there to see and learn in front of my face, I've always just assumed that it didn't matter which party, that the people at the State Department really were there to put the United States first, the United States interests. That's why they were there. That's what the State Department was. It took me the longest time as a young person to figure out what the Department of State meant, what it did, and all that. And then the same thing at the Pentagon. And the only government agency I was ever curious about was the IRS. But everything else, I just assumed that there was an identifiable and common patriotism among people that work there. The naivete was my belief that all Americans love America. My naivete was that all Americans appreciate the achievements and the accomplishments of the United States in becoming the force for good in the world, becoming the real lone superpower in the world, the bastion and beacon for freedom. And I can remember when I learned that wasn't true. I was a combination of disappointed and shocked. Now, this is not recent. I'm talking 30 years ago, but I was still an adult. I remember being shocked when I was told the lay of the land, told the truth, that there are people in the State Department who want to undermine Republican presidents. There are people in the State Department who do not think the United States is the solution. And it's all been part of my self-education and awareness project about liberalism. Because the learning, the education, the becoming informed about these various intricacies and involvement have coincided with what I've learned about liberalism. And so even though I knew, even after, beyond the days of my naivete, when I had awakened and discovered what really was going on in parts of these agencies, like at the same time I learned that not every general in the Pentagon wants to win wars. Some of them don't want to fight them. Some of them, all they are, they politically correct generals, and they want to climb the ranks by engaging in whatever political objectives their superiors have, whether they're good or bad for the United States. And then you have the warrior generals that I thought they all were back in my days of naivete. It just didn't compute. It was when I first realized this, it just didn't compute that we actually would have in the department, given how many people live in America and the pool of people to choose from, to go out and find the absolute best who believe in America, the fact that we populated that place with people who didn't. Why would anybody do this? I started asking all the obvious questions that people who are on the cusp of learning things that shocked them. I went through all of that. And then the next stage was, well, why don't we get rid of those people when we acquire power? Why would, say, an incoming Republican president keep people in the State Department who are there to actively undermine his agenda because they disagree with him politically and who believe the United States is the problem in the world and not the solution, or people who believe the United States has caused so many problems that we owe the world so much because of how much we've, screwed people, we've mistreated people, we've stolen resources, whatever it is. I've never understood why. Like when George W. Bush, after he was inaugurated in 2001, because of the acrimony of the Florida recount and the massive disputes over the legitimacy of his win. Remember that when they said the Supreme Court stopped the recount when Gore was on the verge of pulling ahead, and they still to this day believe that. I mean, I understood part of me why Bush didn't clean house, because he was trying to show that he was going to be president of all the people, and he was going to demonstrate he could be a compassionate conservative and work with everybody. And it came back to bite him. I mean, look at his administration. The guy was undermined daily by his own government. And this is, intellectually, this has just been one of the hardest things for me to understand. And I've asked people who are very close with that world, and they're not nearly as surprised by it as I am, because it's where they live, it's what they do, it's just the way Washington operates. So this is a long way around to telling you that when I see this headline, it's a bloodbath at the State Department, my reaction is, finally, it's about time. So here we have Rex Tillerson, who's the new Secretary of State for Trump, going in there, and they're weeding out all these people that they can identify who are going to be standing in their way. They have every right to do this. I don't care whether they're shadow operatives in the Obama years or the Clinton years. I don't care if they're career appointees. Get rid of them, give them their pensions, whatever they get. But get rid of them. Get your own people in there. I've never understood why the Republicans do not take that all the way. And I'm happy to see it here, because this is the battlefield on which we are waging war. And the Democrats do this. Democrats assume power, and the first thing they do is go through the Department of Justice and find out who's going to be standing in their way, and they get rid of, remember J. Christian Adams? He ended up resigning when Eric Holder said there aren't going to be any prosecutions of the new Black Panther Party and their obvious voter fraud in Philadelphia, because there have been too many prosecutions of my people, Holder said, or something like that. So we're going to cut him some slack. And it was his division in the Justice Department, J. Christian Adams, that was doing the investigation. So he resigned, and he made no bones about why. So the Democrats do this constantly. They get rid of people at the Pentagon. They get rid of all of the U.S. Bill Clinton came in and fired every U.S. attorney in 1993. So it's a long way around saying this is a good move, and it's overdue. And I think it's another bit of evidence that things that Trump and his people are doing that just have the Washington establishment livid. Just livid. All right, a brief timeout. As you know, the president cited me in an early morning tweet today in the 7 a.m. hour, thanking me for my characterization of his press conference yesterday. And by virtue of that, I think acknowledging that he is appreciative of the fact that I get him, that I understand who he is, where he came from, where he's going, how he survives, how he works. I frankly don't think there's anybody else in media that understands Trump any better than I do. And I say that with no braggadocio. I say that with no airs of anything. I just factually believe it to be the case. There's a political story on Trump tweeting me. There's a Hill.com story and a Daily Mail. The Daily Mail, interesting, is a little snarky, even though we constantly refer to the Daily Mail and we hype them here and praise their work. They were a little snarky, not big snark. It was minor snark. And then CNN. This is a story also when I get into most memorable lines from the Trump press conference. And it's classic. The lines that they cite are the lines that they think everybody should be appalled by. The quotes that they put from Trump in this story are obviously quotes that they think everybody's going to be appalled and offended and outraged by, because they are. And what they don't understand is that just a whole lot of people who read this story are going to be laughing themselves silly, and they're going to be applauding, while CNN thinks that they are doing great damage to Trump. That also reminds me of something that has happened to me along the same lines, almost identically, except with a different group. In the meantime, another brief obscene profit timeout. We'll be right back. Don't go away. Meeting and surpassing all audience expectations every day. Great to have you here. Open Line Friday. We always go to the phones, we try to anyway, in the first hour. And we're going to start with Julie in Temecula, California. Great to have you. How are you?
Hi. Thank you for having me. Okay, I'll try and make this brief. But the Democrats, of course, are thrilled that Flynn is out. He is extremely knowledgeable, especially about ISIS, and President Obama wanted him out, and so this is such a bad deal that he's out. But this is what I'm thinking. I'm thinking that can Trump and Pence have a heart-to-heart with him on the trust issue? Because I think that if they do this, they could probably have more trust between the three of them and everyone else if he does that. And the Democrats, I heard one media source saying that Trump caved in like a house of cards, and they were laughing about it. So they got out the most feared person. They were so fearful of Flynn and what he knows about ISIS and how to defeat and all kinds of levels. I mean, you know more than I, and obviously Trump does, of the levels of knowledge and wisdom that Flynn brings. And if the media comes back, if he does this, and the media comes back and just has a field day on him, can he make up his mind, or what's wrong with this guy? Anything they throw at him, who cares? This is for our country, and I know Trump wants good people, and he is a good person. He would be a good asset.
Do you know Flynn personally?
Have a hard on that trust issue.
Do you know Flynn personally?
No, I don't. I live in Temecula, California, and I love Trump, and I love what he does. And I think I truly believe that Trump cares about our country. And I've seen him in his humility and knowing he wants to be there for all of it.
No, I don't disagree with that. It's just you're making the case for Flynn as though you or somebody you know knows Flynn.
No, I just think because Trump has always, his whole life, from what I can see, surrounds himself with the best. And I think that he should,
Well, let me stop you here, because the first thing I want to share with you is I don't think your scenario is ever going to happen officially. They will never. I mean, it might have a heart-to-heart with Flynn, but there will never be an official welcoming him back into any official capacity in the administration. That isn't going to happen. It isn't. It wouldn't be necessary. And by the way, can't do it now after you have uttered the reason why you got rid of him. Oh, you just couldn't trust him. But Julie, let me tell you, there's a lot about this. I said at the end of the program yesterday, because I got an email after engaging in effusive praise for Trump at the press conference. I got an email. Is there anything that you didn't like? Is there anything that bothers you? But I said, yeah, this whole Flynn situation, something about it doesn't sit right. And here, I'll practice my brevity here in advance of Fox News Sunday. Everything we know suggests Flynn didn't do anything. CNN has a story, the FBI is not even going to prosecute him, so he didn't talk about sanctions. He just listened while the Soviet ambassador did, but he didn't commit to anything. He did tell Pence something that wasn't true, and he sent Pence out saying things on national TV that were not true. That is curious. But on the other side of this, Flynn didn't do anything. He did not do anything wrong. So why? How did this blow up to be such a big deal? And there's more to it than just, the Democrats, they get to set the narrative. The media gets to set the narrative, and the narrative is that Trump and Flynn were secretly negotiating with the Russians and who knows whatever, trying to undermine Obama's sanctions and so forth. That wasn't true. But there clearly was something that wasn't going well. Something wasn't sitting right. And the decision was made somewhere within the administration to let Flynn go, and they settled on that, well, we need trust. All during that presser yesterday, President Trump did nothing but sing Flynn's praises, how much he likes him, how much he respects him, it didn't sound like the characterizations of somebody you've just had to dismiss from your administration. So, and I don't know enough to even speculate possibilities. Could there be power struggles? Was there somebody in there that wants Flynn's job? Somebody in there close to Trump that just didn't like Flynn? Somebody in there that got to said Flynn's dangerous? He's a walking powder keg. You need to limit the damage now. I don't know. But none of what the allegations were have happened. He didn't talk to the Russians, didn't talk about sanctions. He listened while the Russian ambassador did. No charges. FBI's heard the transcript of the call. Nothing went wrong. The only thing that happened was he told Pence that he hadn't done any of that when he, in fact, had. Fastest 3 hours in media. The first hour is already in the can. But we've got so much more coming up, my friends, including your exciting phone calls and whatever I have left in the stack, which is a lot of really, really hot stuff. So don't go anywhere. Half my brain tied behind my back every day, just to be fair, just to make it fair. Big, big believer in fairness here. Rush Limbaugh behind the golden EIB microphone on Friday. Let's hit it.
Live from the Southern Command in sunny South Florida, it's Open Line Friday.
And the telephone number is 800-282-2882 if you want to send an email, lrushmo at eibnet.us. Now, remember the rules on Open Line Friday. Essentially, there aren't any. Monday through Thursday, you have to talk about things I'm interested in, or you don't get through. Because I don't want to sit here and be bored, and it doesn't help anybody. You're going to talk about things I care about. On Friday, we broom all that, and I'll either fake being interested, or you're going to be on your own. But it's at least a way for callers to bring things up other than what might be out there. It could be anything. So it's just an opportunity. If you have something on your mind, let's hear from you. Again, 800-282-2882. I mentioned earlier, and you probably have seen it, that the president tweeted out thanks to me today for my comments on his press conference yesterday. It was, thank you for all of the nice statements on the press conference yesterday. Rush Limbaugh said one of greatest ever, fake media not happy. Now, this has been written about in several drive-by news sites. The Politico has made reference to it in a relatively long story. The UK Daily Mail has characterized it in a bit of a snarky way. Very, very tiny snark, but nevertheless. And the Hill.com has written about it. Not only that, it became fodder for many on morning television today. We put together a brief montage of people from CBS, ABC, CNBC, and C-SPAN all talking about the Trump tweet, quoting me.
This morning, he's already tweeted that Rush Limbaugh told him it was one of his greatest.
Praising his own performance, he writes, "Thank you for all the nice statements on the press conference yesterday. Rush Limbaugh said one of the greatest ever. Fake media, not happy."
This morning he said, "Thank you for nice statements." Rush Limbaugh said one of the greatest ever. Fake media, not happy. So the president had a strategy here. Did he succeed?
Thank you for all of the nice statements on the press conference yesterday. Rush Limbaugh said it was one of the greatest greatest ever. Fake media not happy! !
Thank you all for the nice statements on the press conference yesterday. Rush Limbaugh said, one of the greatest ever. He's got Limbaugh.
Thank you for all the nice statements on the press conference yesterday. Rush Limbaugh said, one of the greatest ever. Fake media not happy. They came out at 6:43 this morning.
Right. It just is. It's amazing to me that, of course, that makes news. I mean, it actually is not amazing to me. Presidents have been talking about me ever since I've been doing this program. Remember this one? Grab audio soundbite number 6. This was really one of the, well, it also happened at a campaign, but this was when Bill Clinton was already president. This was June 24th, 1994. And Clinton's aboard Air Force One. He's flying into St. Louis. He's going to dedicate some new something or other somewhere. And he's on the phone with the morning team at our Blowtorch affiliate in St. Louis, KMOX. And he says this.
After I get off the radio today with you, Rush Limbaugh will have 3 hours to say whatever he wants.
Would you like to leave a message?
I won't have any opportunity to respond, and there's no truth detector. You won't get on afterwards and say what was true and what wasn't.
Here's the President of the United States on Air Force One. He's the most powerful man in the world. He can say whatever he wants, whenever he wants. He's got the drive-by media in his pocket. And he goes on KMOX to complain that I have 3 hours unfettered to say whatever I want to say, and there's nobody at KMOX that will correct what I get wrong. And then Obama, he had his own references to me. We have, let's see, we just pick a couple of them here. This is January 13th, 2017, NBC Deadline. He was talking, or date, is it date? It's Dateline, not Deadline. It could be Deadline if things don't change for NBC. Anyway, he was talking to Lester Holt. And Lester Holt said, given that the recovery was as uneven as it was, with the people on the bottom slower to recover than the people on the top, in some way plant the seeds in your mind for the election of Trump?
Well, what is true is that the ability of Republican leaders to rile up their base, helped along by folks like Rush Limbaugh and some commentators on Fox News, I think created an environment in which Republican voters would punish Republicans for cooperating with me. That hothouse of back and forth argument and really sharp partisanship, I think, has been harmful to the country.
31 seconds that answer. Trump would have answered a question 3 different ways in 31 seconds. Number one, didn't that answer seem slow and rambling and exactly what Northeastern liberals love, this faux intellectualism? But nevertheless, here is Obama ripping the media. And he constantly ripped Fox News. He really had it in for Steve Doocy. You know, people may not know this, but I mean, because Doocy's a happy-go-lucky guy, and Obama, in his deep, dark crevices of his mind, really wanted to level on Doocy, but he didn't want to just single anybody out there. He's constantly ragging on Fox, constantly ragging on me. Did the media ever have a problem with that? I mean, look at the way they're going after Trump for calling them fake news and this. I mean, they're beside themselves. They don't know how to react to this. And I'm going to tell you, one of the things I said about Trump's press conference yesterday, that Trump obviously didn't tweet, but some here in the drive-by stumbled across my quote, and I said, I think it was one of the most effective press conferences ever. And to my surprise, there were a couple of news outlets that understood exactly what I meant. When I said it was one of the most effective, what I meant was effective in rallying his voters, effective in rallying his supporters, because they needed it. The Trump supporters, Trump voters, been watching this past month go by with these incessant, endless allegations of incompetence. And Trump had been tweeting and reacting to it, but they needed this. And that's why I referred to it as effective, because it clearly was, and they were discombobulated by it, flabbergasted by it. And I don't think that the media is ever going to be on the same stage with Donald Trump. I don't think the majority of them are ever going to be even in the same universe. They live in two separate worlds, And they don't understand Trump's. And they have contempt for it. They have contempt for people that voted for Trump. They have no desire to understand who they are. They already think they know. They have no desire to drill down and find out why people would reject the woman they loved, Hillary Clinton. It doesn't compute. They just decide that these people are not worthy of any kind of curiosity or respect. And they continue to hold them in contempt and disgust. And so they live in this world. And I think this question was fascinating yesterday from Jim Acosta at CNN, where he asks Trump, and he's dead serious, don't you think that you're doing a terrible damage to the First Amendment by criticizing the media? Don't you think that you were undermining the First Amendment? Don't you think that you were undermining our great democracy by attacking the media? So what do we have here? We have a media that lives in its own universe. They live in a vacuum where they are able to not just criticize, they're able to destroy. They're able, in fact, it's one of the ways you get a bonus, take somebody out. They are fully fine and hunky-dory with the idea that they may destroy somebody, and they think that's part of the job description. But you turn around and criticize them, and that's not permitted in the vacuum in which they live. They have free reign over you because I guess this is how they define their constitutional responsibility. And since they have constitutional recognition, somehow they've all been taught at journalism school that nobody may assail them, that nobody may criticize them. If anybody ever tries to do an investigative report on a journalist, much like the kind and the way a journalist would do on a public figure, have you ever seen a stuck pig? Because that's what the journalist looks like. Like if you assign somebody to follow a journalist around and to dig deep and find out how many illegitimate kids he had, how many times he got drunk in school, do you have any DUIs? How many people hate the guy? How many people from his junior high school, college days are willing to go on record and talk about what a bully he was? You try that with a journalist. And they you can't do it. They go bonkers. They go berserk. We're journalists. I'm just a journalist. You can't go after me like that. I'm immune. No, we're going to go after you like that. It's exactly the way you go after people. We have a constitutional responsibility to hold truth to power, blah, 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 blah. And so the idea that Donald Trump would even deign, a lot of people have criticized media, but he's the president. And in their world, presidents and political people are supposed to defer. Such is their power. Everybody's supposed to be deferential. And Donald Trump is not. And he's not intimidated by them. And he's not frightened by them. And in fact, he loves toying with them. While they're sitting there wringing their hands and taking things so seriously, and it's the end of the world, Trump is laughing and having the greatest time. He'll go out and say, yeah, and I got more electoral votes than anybody since Reagan. That's what they tell me. And the media starts fact-checking immediately, and they just blare. They shout, Trump lied. Trump made it up. George H.W. Bush got more electoral votes than Trump. And they think Trump's going to be devastated. They think Trump's going to be embarrassed that he's been exposed as a liar. Doesn't matter to Trump. They don't understand why Trump says things like, and what they really don't understand is how Trump supporters don't care about any of this. Trump supporters like it. Trump supporters know when they know when it's time to listen to him and when it's time to laugh and maybe not take it so seriously. They're having fun with it. And part of the reason is to just watch how tightly wound the people in the press corps are and openly, vividly demonstrate their utter inability to understand or relate to Trump. Let me give you another example here. I have here my formerly nicotine-stained fingers. A story from CNN. It's by somebody named Dan Merica. most memorable lines from Trump's press conference. And now the purpose of this story is to appall people. They're gonna mention these lines, these quotes. They fully expect everybody who hears this story or to read it to be appalled and offended and outraged and demand that something happened to him. They're just supposed to be livid that we have a president like this. Here are the lines that they mention. Trump's most memorable lines, according to Dan Merrick, on how things are going: this administration's running like a fine-tuned machine. On leaks and news, the leaks are real, the news is fake. On picking his next question, I want to find a friendly reporter. Those three lines have been cited by CNN as the reasons you and anybody else should have been appalled. You should have been outraged. How dare a president act this way? And they're shocked when people are not appalled by it. They're shocked when people laugh at it. They're shocked when people are amused by it. They're angry when people are entertained by it. And what they don't understand, when Trump says, for example, this administration, chaos, I remember that, chaos, I get up, I look at the media, every chaos? There's no chaos here. We're running like a fine-tuned machine. The way a Trump supporter hears that is not at all with Trump's words. What the Trump supporter hears is, screw you and your reporting on me. They want people like Trump and others to fight back on these attempts to damage. The media is trying to damage Trump, just like they damaged George W. Bush, and George W. Bush and Rove never fought back. Trump does, and people are standing up and cheering for that alone. I don't think the press, and believe me, this is fundamental. I know that the Washington establishment doesn't, and I know the press doesn't. I don't think the entire universe outside of Trump and his supporters has any way of understanding how many Trump supporters thought, and maybe still do think a little, that we're on the verge of losing the United States of America forever. And that is a big deal. The people that voted for Donald Trump, the vast majority of them really thought that if Hillary Clinton won this election, that was it. That was the country. Say goodbye to it. She would have had the Supreme Court nominations, or all the people retiring, and a bunch of the left would have retired. Who knows who else? It would have been the ongoing, opening up the country to outsiders and expanding the government to take care of outsiders who are called immigrants. Do you realize what's been done to this whole definition of immigrant? The way Democrats and the left talk about immigration is anybody who wants to come to the country. And so if you're opposed to anybody coming in, then you're anti-immigrant. The American people love immigration. They just want it obeyed. They want the laws obeyed. They want there to be assimilation. Nobody I know is opposed to immigration. What we're opposed to is opening the borders and let non-citizens pour in here and call that immigration. Because that constitutes the diluting of the very foundation of this country, and they saw it being done on purpose. And that's why we're on the verge of losing this country. And Trump represented the giant stop sign. And they're not going to throw Trump overboard because he might get it wrong on who won the most electoral votes. And they're not going to think less of him because he might have gotten it wrong. And they're not going to think less of him because he might jokingly insult a reporter. But in their world, lose the country. Why we were making the country modern. Why we were making the country better. Why we were getting rid of all the old traditions that made this country what it was bad, and we're modernizing it, and we're turning this country over to the people who really should have it. Outsiders who don't live here. Blah, blah. Two different worlds. But they don't understand. They laugh at the idea that you think we might have been on the verge of losing the country. They laugh at it. So if they don't understand that, if they mock that, laugh at that, they're never going to understand Trump or why people voted for him. There's no way they can. Our next caller was on hold for 2 hours last Friday. We didn't get to him, so we asked if we'd call him back. Here's Stephen from Murray, Utah. Stephen, I have about 30 seconds here.
Hi, Rush.
I'm just kidding. We're gonna get you started here, but I'm gonna hold you during the break, and we'll continue after the break. But you're calling about. You read a book by Steve Young, the Fortner quarterback, right?
That's true, and I made a connection between his story and a quote of yours, where you talk about most of the reasons people say they can't do something are reasons they've made up. Would you like me to?
Yeah. That my belief that most of the limitations people have or face are self-imposed. Did Steve Young write that? And he wrote that in his book?
No, it's not in the book. But in the book, he talks about becoming an NFL quarterback. He said it was a great opportunity in my life. It was also one of the most challenging things I've ever done.
Right. Okay, hold your thought right there. We have to take another obscene profit time out. We make a lot of money here. We'll be right back. And we'll get back here to Stephen in Murray, Utah. Just a brief moment. President Trump now speaking in South Carolina, just north of Charleston at the Boeing plant. And he's standing right in front of a brand new Boeing 787 Dreamliner. And what's memorable about this, Boeing voted this week not to unionize. It was a huge blow to many of the organized labor unions all across the fruited plain. I don't know that Trump's visit is coincidental with that, or is because of that, maybe coincidental. But Boeing is one of the companies that has agreed to cut the price on the next round of Air Force One aircraft, and to do what they can about building plants in the United States and creating American jobs. And the vote not to unionize was clearly part of that. The president's on his way down here for the weekend. He'll be back here in South Florida for the weekend, and he's stopping in South Carolina on his way here. And I think he's probably going to be here through Monday, since it's President's Day. He's either leaving at 11:30 Monday night or 11:30 Sunday night or Monday morning. I'm not sure which. I saw the itinerary, and I can't remember specific. Anyway, here's Stephen in Murray, Utah. So you're reading Steve Young's book, and the challenges he faced coming up reminded him of the quote you heard me say about...
Not quite, Rush. It reminded me of your quote. It reminded me of your quote where you said most of the reasons people think they can't do something are reasons they've invented.
Right.
Everything you do in life is up to you. Part of life is realizing you have much more potential and ability than you'd ever know. But it's up to you to face the fears and unleash that which really drives you. Now, as I read this book by Steve Young, his path to the NFL wasn't easy. At BYU, he was number 8 on the team depth chart. And he said, well, I could have thrown a pity party and just given up and gone home, or I could have chosen to have a positive perspective on life and let my play prove people wrong. People told Steve Young he'd never make it as a left-handed quarterback, that his accuracy wasn't there. Well, he worked on his accuracy, and, I mean, look at the way his career turned out in the Hall of Fame and his Super Bowl ring. So that just reminded me of that quote from you. And I've noticed that quote to be true in my own life. You see, I was born premature, and I have some challenges, and I use this quote of yours in some college essays or during some lectures and journalism classes. And my professors were pretty impressed, and I've noticed that quote of yours to be true in my own life. And so I wanted to thank you for that.
Well, I appreciate that. I really do. I love having things come back like this, because that's always great to have affirmation like that. You know, speaking of Steve Young, I mean, he's overcome a lot. There's no question, and he's achieved a lot. But I think one of the things, he probably would admit this if he were here. And I think people in the sports media, people who follow NFL, are pretty much aware of this. But he was second string to Joe Montana for a number of years. It's like being second string to Babe Ruth. It doesn't matter who's next. There's no way they can measure up. I mean, Joe Montana was mythologically huge. In fact, Joe Montana, that was one name. I mean, Joe Montana was such a big deal in San Francisco. It wasn't Joe Montana. It was Joe Montana. He just owned everything. And Young was on the bench. I can remember I was at a game, the 49ers and the New Orleans Saints at the Superdome, and Montana was hurt. And Young was the starting quarterback. And it was not yet his job because Montana was going to come back and reclaim the job, but soon thereafter would be traded or released and go to the Kansas City Chiefs. But during the pregame, Joe Montana was granting interviews on the sideline to anybody that had a camera. Even though he wasn't playing, he was a bigger deal than Steve Young, who was going to be starting that day. Now, I don't know. I know Steve Young. I got to know Steve Young during my stint at the pre-politicized days of ESPN on the Sunday NFL pregame show. And I've only met Montana once. But, folks, the reason that I have all these things about such philosophies is the only limitations we have in life, for the most of them, are the ones we place on ourselves. When you get to the rarefied air that people like Montana and Steve Young and other NFL quarterbacks are breathing, you can't believe the cutthroat, competitive nature of things. And make no mistake, and this is not a cut. I don't want anybody calling Montana and telling him that I was ripped, because it's not. But Joe Montana, on a day that Steve Young's going to start because Montana's hurt, and Montana is still trying to soak up all the oxygen with all the pregame interviews. Now, he could turn them down, but that's not going to happen. And the press wanting to talk to Montana was quite natural. He wasn't seeking them out. But it was a way to keep the light shining on him. He wanted the job back. It's just the way it is. It wasn't mean. It wasn't cruel. It's just the nature of competition. And my fear is we're not teaching competition. We're shielding people from it. For the longest time, children, nobody's allowed to win anything, participation trophies. But when you get to real life, and if you really want to amount to something, when you get whatever line of work you're in, as you get to the top of that line of work, there are very few people there. That's why the phrase rarefied air. And it is cutthroat. The competition is cutthroat, even among best friends. And you have to be able, by virtue of experience, to be able to deal with it. You're not going to win every outing. I don't mean game. You're not going to beat everybody out for the top job. And sometimes you're going to be the best, but you're not going to get the gig because there are other factors. People making a decision might like somebody more than they like you. It's vicious. And you have to be totally singularly focused on yourself. Not in a bad way. You have to believe in yourself. You have to believe there's a reason you're trying to pursue the highest levels you can go. And that's because you can do it, and you can do it well, and you can do it better than anybody else. The minute you carve out that life for yourself, you are making enemies. Because a lot of people are going to be fighting for the same thing, and they're going to try to be beating you out and denying you what you want. You're going to be doing the same thing to them. There are going to be others who just resent you for thinking you're that good. They're going to resent you for even having the audacity to try to climb that high. I mean, folks, it is vicious out there. It's also very healthy. All of these things are things that successful people have to go through in order not just to reach the pinnacle, but then to stay there. Because I'm going to tell you, getting there, while fraught with stress and competition and never-ending assaults, getting there is not even half as hard as staying. Because once you get there or close to it, everybody wants what you have, and it's much easier to go south than north when you're at the top. And so that's why I have this philosophy about limitations. It's easy to be a victim. Look how easy the Democrat Party has made almost half this country think they're victims of something. And what happens to you when you're a victim? Well, when you're a victim, you automatically have a built-in excuse for failure. When you are a victim, it's always somebody else's fault. When you're a victim, success is not possible. When you are a victim of something, you are acknowledging that you are as far as you're going to get, and you can't get any further because there are more powerful forces arrayed against you than the force of yourself against it. And the Democrat Party does this on purpose. The Democrat Party makes as many people victims as possible because it freezes them right where they are. And that's usually in lower middle class or abject poverty. It makes them resentful. If you're a victim, you're not happy. You can't be happy. It's impossible to be happy. It's even difficult to be content. If you're a victim, you're always mad, but never at yourself. You're mad at somebody else. The Democrats have parlayed this into one of the biggest political movements in human history, and that would be of the victimized. Look at how many victim groups there are, and they all happen to be Democrat constituency groups. They all are on the protest march. They're all angry. They're all enraged. Some of them are women. Some of them are minorities. Some of them are illegal immigrants. You name it, but they all have one thing in common. They have given up on the notion that they could be somebody, and instead have descended into full-fledged victimhood and the comfort of being in a group of like-minded failures. Why isn't everybody a victim? It'd be easy. Anybody could choose that if they wanted to. Being a victim is almost as easy as being a liberal. It's one of the most gutless choices you could make. Doesn't take much. Built-in excuses for failure. Built-in excuses for being miserable, built-in excuses for being angry all the time. No reason to try to be happy. It's not possible. You're a victim. Victim of what? Well, you're a victim of discrimination. Well, you're a victim of America. You're a victim of America's past. You're a victim of religion. You're a victim of bigotry, of homophobia, whatever. You're a victim of something. The Democrats got one for you. If you want to be a victim, call them up. Call Schumer. Tell him, hey, I want to join you. I want to be a victim. Do you have a group for me? He'll have one. He'll ask you what color you are. He'll ask you what your sexual orientation is. He'll ask you what your gender is. He'll ask you any number of questions, and he'll give you your choice of victim groups that you can join. And then he'll show you where you go to get a food stamp allocation here or this or that there, how you get emergency health care if you need it, all on the Democrats, and it can keep it flowing if you just do two things. Stay victim and vote Democrat. But the people that don't choose that end up being the ones victims hate. The people that choose to face life, the people that choose to embrace it, the people that choose to just soak it up, the people that choose to dive right in and test their limits and find out what they're capable of and how good they can be. And if that's really what they want to do, victims are going to hate them because they are showing what anybody could do if they just had an attitude adjustment. So if you think, for example, that, well, let's say you want to do a job and you want to rise really high in that career, but where you live, that job doesn't exist. Your town's too small. Or maybe the business is in your town, but even if you reach the pinnacle there, it's not, because it's a small town, it's not nearly as high as you could go. If you're unwilling to move, well, that's all on you. That's a limitation you're placing on yourself. Now, that's fine. If that's what makes you happy. I'm not criticizing things. I'm just pointing out that it's not usually anybody else's fault when you don't get what you want. Sometimes it is. There's exceptions to everything. But it's usually the self-limitations that we attach to ourselves. I wanted to be a success in radio. There was no way it was ever going to happen if I stayed where I was born. It was not possible. Nothing against where I was born, nothing against the people there. It just wasn't possible. I knew when I was 15 that I was going to have to leave. if I was serious about what I was doing. And back then, I knew that every climb, every rung up the ladder was going to involve another move. And it did. And I wanted it badly. I remained dedicated to my desires. And it's what enabled me to come back after being fired 7 or 8 times, whatever it was. Only twice for legitimate insubordination. Look, I could go on here, but I can't. We have to make some money, which we do a lot. Be right back. Back to the phones. This is Bob in Merced, California. Great to have you with us, sir. What's shaking? What's happening? What's up?
God bless you, Mr. Limbaugh. Wanted to say mega dittos from Merced, California, a steadfast and unmovable deplorable. And
yes, there are a bunch of them there. I happen to know.
Yeah. Hey, I just wanted to thank you for the influence that you've had over our family. My dad turned me on to you back in the 90s. I was in my 20s. And I knew that I was a Reagan Republican, but my dad said, no, son, we're conservatives. And if you want to understand what it means to be a conservative, you need to listen to this man, Rush Limbaugh, out of Sacramento. So I started listening, and it took me a little while to understand you, being in my 20s because of my age and so forth, but I finally did, and then I was hooked. And so you have shaped my dad, myself, my 3 children are all now very dedicated conservatives, and now they're having children of their own, and so we're believing that a 4th generation will be shaped by the Limbaugh Institute for Advanced Conservative Studies. So I want to thank you for that.
That's just a beautiful thing. That's wonderful. I can't.
Well, my granddaughter will be read the Rush Revere books. I can assure you that, and I can't wait till she's old enough. She's only 2. Got another one on the way. She's in the making. She'll be here in May. But anyway, I can't wait to read those books to them and shape them. But the reason I called was I was wondering if you having seen these states that had previously voted Democrat come on board with Trump, those of us who in California who thought in 2012 that we had lost the country and that it was over and that there was no hope, having seen this turnaround now, even people like us here in California have some renewed hope and vigor. And I was wondering if you could offer a strategy, some advice to us here in California to maybe inspire some hope that maybe we can affect change here in California. And maybe you might even have to unfetter that other side of your brain to answer this one, because I know it's huge, California.
California is a huge challenge, and it's easier to explain what happened to California than it is to tell you what to do to fix it. When I lived in California in 1984-87, it was a Republican state. Now, Sacramento, where I lived, was 73% Democrat voter registration. When I got there, it was in the 60s when I left. We had amazing success in converting Democrats in Sacramento. But Pete Wilson, Ronald Reagan, these all people elected governors and so forth. It's only been with the advent of the 1986 immigration bill that we've lost California, if I might say. And now it's just gone so far left, they're seriously talking about seceding. They're seriously. Just got an email. Well, you're really being so philosophical today. I'm just answering Friday phone calls. Just open line Friday. And we've got an hour of it remaining. Illegal immigration is what changed California. It's why it's a harbinger for the rest of the country if it's not stopped. Speaking of California and flipping California, wait till I share with you this next headline. That's all it'll take.
Live from the Southern Command in sunny South Florida, it's Open Line Friday.
This is one of those, oh my God. And the minute you read it, you realize it's true, and that's what makes it an oh my God. By the way, greetings. Welcome back. Great to have you. Rush Limbaugh and Open Line Friday, final big busy broadcast hour. Your highly trained broadcast specialist executing assigned host duties flawlessly with zero mistakes. Here at 800-282-2882. I just know Trump wants one of those 787s. He probably went in there and said, can I fly home in this thing? Anyway, We just had a call from Merced, California. A guy wanted to know ultimately what he could do, what anybody could do, what we could do to flip California, because it was just in the 1980s and prior that the Republican Party literally owned that state. Well, that's a bit far. I mean, the Democrats had the state assembly in a lot of those years. But, you know, Reagan was a two-term governor, George Duke Majan, there was Pete Wilson, and even Schwarzenegger was a Republican in name as far as party identification. And you want to trace California's move to the far left. You go back to the 1986 Simpson-Mazzoli bill. And Simpson-Mazzoli was where we granted amnesty to, at the time, what was 3.5 illegal aliens. And that's it. It did not, we were told that would be it. We're going to start being strict about guarding the borders and making sure that there wasn't any more illegal immigration, but that didn't happen. That was the design. As Ted Kennedy, Simpson, Missouri, that was their idea here, and it's worked out magnificently for them to this extent. This is a Breitbart story that just was published yesterday. You ready for this headline? Mexican presidential candidate holds anti-Trump rally in Los Angeles. What more needs to be said? A guy running for the presidency of Mexico, Wendy, is campaigning in Los Angeles. I'm sure he's also campaigning in Mexico City. He's campaigning in Guadalajara. He's campaigning at the Night of the Iguana. He's campaigning in Cabo. But he's also campaigning in Los Angeles. And I'm sure he'll stop in San Diego on the way back. That doesn't say it all. And we're talking here about illegal. You know what the left has succeeded in doing? They have succeeded in terms of the vernacular, the lexicon. They've redefined the word immigration. And to tell everyone we're anti-immigrant. That's one of the whole thrusts of the existence of the Democrat Party and the left, that people like you and me are anti-immigrant. As though that wall means nobody gets in, as though we don't want anybody that's not like us in here. And that's not at all the truth. We're all big believers in immigration. They think they've got a monopoly on this silly idea that we are a nation of immigrants. America's greatness is traceable to its immigrants. I'm sorry, I don't buy that as a standalone idea anyway, because really what they're trying to say with that America's greatness is due to America's diversity, and that has not a thing to do with it. American greatness is because of the Constitution and Declaration of Independence and our country. Greatness has nothing to do with diversity, skin color, race, ethnicity, nothing to do with it. And that's not a cut. The people that say diversity is the reason for the greatness are purposely assaulting the United States as founded. They want you to believe that America was only great for a few people as founded, because as founded, America was gigantically discriminating against the poor and against people of color and against transgenders. Yeah, I've read the Federalist Papers, you know. James Madison, he wasn't popular with the transgender group back then. Did you know that? You won't find the word. It was not a factor. The way they have attempted to modernize things here today, it's just lies. There's a distinct American culture that evolved from the United States founding, and that is what made America great, is what it allowed the human being to become. The United States of America was the first place on earth where average people had the opportunity to become the greatest among all people. It was the first time in human history where people were allowed to pursue the best of their abilities to whatever desire they wanted. because it was a nation founded under the concept of human beings being born free. It wasn't anything to do with immigration. It wasn't anything to do with ethnicity. It wasn't anything to do with diversity. Diversity for diversity's sake is nothing more than affirmative action and can make no claim to being part of America's greatness. And no company can say it either. Our country is great because of our diversity. They can say it, but it has nothing to do with it. Literally nothing to do with it. How diverse you are. Well, it just means we don't discriminate. It means that we value all people. Just fine and dandy. But unless your company makes something or has a service and you have an atmosphere where people working for you can become the best they can be, doesn't matter what your workforce looks like. Doomkoff. Well, this is all the distortions that we have to face now and the things that we're supposed to accept. And chief among them is that immigration means anybody who wants to come in. And we don't even have to make them a citizen. If they want to come here and live here, it's not for you to say they can't. You're being a bigot and a homophobe and a racist or whatever if you say that. So to them, immigration is anybody who gets in. Anybody who wants to come gets in. And that's not what that's illegal immigration. And that's what is opposed. You know, speaking of all of this, I want to remind you of something. We had a couple of calls today about the Rush Revere Time Travel Adventures with Exceptional Americans book series. And this is the President's Day weekend. And the most recent Rush Revere Time Travel Adventures with Exceptional Americans book is Rush Revere and the Presidency. And folks, I have to be honest. I have to tell you, we hear from people, children all over this country, families who are encouraging me to mention the Rush Revere series more often than I do. And I probably should, but I'm just trying to budget everything and get and be as here's the word, diverse. You know, I'm trying to get as much into this show each and every day as I can because there's so much happening, and I feel a compulsion every day to make sure certain things are mentioned. So some days I don't take enough phone calls. Some days I don't mention this enough. Some days I don't get to that at all, whatever it is. And people say, you know, you really got something great. You need to be talking about it more. And I agree. I agree. I don't always get the chance because all the news is constantly breaking. I mean, literally, since breaking news constantly now. But I tell you, since this is President's Day weekend, Monday's President's Day, I'm gonna mention this. The latest book in our New York Times best-selling American history series is Rush Revere and the Presidency. What we have discovered here, and you've probably heard parents calling here to share these stories, children that normally don't like reading and certainly are not interested in history, have become devoted to this series. They have become absorbed. We got an email the other day from a family describing how a couple of their kids hide under a blanket at night with a flashlight to read after they are supposed to be in bed. Parents tell them you got to be in bed by exit, so they go into the bed and they get under the cover with a flashlight and are reading the books. The parents discovered it. They wanted us to know this. And we're talking about 10-year-olds here who are staying up past curfew to read the Rush Revere Time Travel Adventures with Exceptional American series. You know why? Because it's not just history. Because of the usage of a vehicle here called time travel, talking horse, that can time travel back to anywhere in American history, the students, the readers, are taken to these events about which we write, and they experience them. Not just told about them, and they're not just spoken at. They're actually transformed as part of the story to the events that we depict. And in this book, Rush Revere and the Presidency, I'm Rush Revere, and I'm a substitute teacher at a place called Manchester Middle School. And my hilarious sidekick is a smart aleck talking horse named Liberty. He can talk because he was struck by lightning when he was young. And he can time travel. He can only go to American history, but he can time travel. He can take students with him from Manchester Middle, and they go back in time. And that's how they learn about American history. And in this book, one of the students at Manchester Middle wants to be school president, but for all the wrong reasons. And Rush Revere recognizes that it's all the wrong reasons. He wants to be famous. He wants to be hip, wants to be cool. Thinks if he's school president, everybody will like him, and that's what he wants. And so the short version of this is that we travel back in time to meet George Washington and John and Abigail Adams, and old Cam witnesses George Washington's inauguration speech, talks to him about why he ran, why he didn't accept King, why he left office, the whole thing about what being president of anything really is and why seek it. And we made it a point, by the way, to include Martha Washington and Abigail Adams in this book so that young girls reading it would have things, because they were important figures. Martha Washington and Abigail Adams were huge, important figures in American history. We wanted young girl readers to be able to relate in that way. But it's a perfect way for young readers to learn and understand how our presidency started and the man who was the first president and how his morality kept this from becoming a monarchy and how it all works today. So this book was released back in latter part of November. We wanted to wait till after the election crush. And it's at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, retailers all over the place. And I have to add, we post great photos all of the time at Rush Revere's Facebook page. You'll see recent scholarship winners, amazing comments. Liberty the Talking Horse really wants you to like his page there. The guy's got an ego that's out of control. I mean, if you were a horse and you could talk in time travel, you'd have a big ego too, and Liberty does. Wants lots of followers. Facebook.com/Rush Revere. Now, and there are 4 other books. The first one, Rush Revere and The Brave Pilgrims. And they're just all works of art, illustrations, and they're serious books. They're not little picture books, coloring books for little toddlers. I mean, these are books that accept and understand, promote the maturity and intelligence of young readers who actually want to learn American history. So, in fact, here I can show you here is, flash over the little camera, that is the cover of the Rush Revere and the Presidency. I don't have time to zoom in on this. I've only got one hand here to do this with, but that's it. You can check it out. What a timely time to mention this. Now, brief time out here. We will come back. It's Open Line Friday. We'll get back to the phones. And what else do I have here? Well, yeah, I want to remind you something from the New York Times back in August of last year. And yeah, some stuff here. So we'll wrap the week up with a bang. Be back right after this, folks. Is that right? Scott Pruitt was confirmed. Scott Pruitt confirmed as director of the EPA. A guy who once stated he wanted to get rid of it. Now, what was happening today, employees at the EPA have been calling their senators to urge them to vote today against Scott Pruitt, Trump's contentious nominee to run the agency. This is the New York Times. They described this as a remarkable display of activism and defiance that presages turbulent times ahead for the EPA. So the underlings of the EPA were calling their senator, please vote against Pruitt, please go in, please don't, we can't handle it, please vote against Pruitt, please, please. And the New York Times characterized that as a remarkable display of activism and defiance. Many of the scientists, environmentalists, lawyers, and policy wackos who work in EPA orifices around the country say the calls are a last resort For workers who fear a nominee selected to run an agency he's made a career out of fighting. I hope we soon see a headline like we saw today about the State Department. Rex Tillerson cleaning house at the State Department. Anyway, remarkable display of activism did not prevent Pruitt from becoming confirmed as director of the EPA. But, well, I don't know. Maybe active on the unemployment. Depends. Some of them are going to quit and protest, but there's going to be a lot of them stay and try to undermine things. Don't you think there's not an Obama deep state at EPA? There sure as hell is. That's where climate change lives. I'm telling you, they're probably even more radical and I was going to say vicious, radical, and committed at the EPA than they are at the intelligence agencies in terms of Obamaites and Clinton. This is we're going to have to keep an eye on this EPA. There's going to be hell's a pop in there. You watch. In the meantime, here's Richard in Santa Cruz, California. Welcome to Open Line Friday. How are you?
Hey, it's an honor to speak to you, Mr. Limbaugh.
Thank you very much.
Titan of truth and technology you are. I was calling because here in Santa Cruz, liberal Santa Cruz, they did a sweep of the notorious Central American gang MS-13. And instead of the people in Watsonville being happy to get rid of gang members, they went to city council and protested that we cooperated with Homeland Security. And they also had a big protest where 7,600 students didn't go to school, I believe it was yesterday, which cost the city there $410,000 of loss because they weren't teaching anybody anything.
Well, that actually may be a benefit.
Yeah, probably. It's really quite ridiculous out here. I mean, we had the whole taking away pretty much the Second Amendment, and even though the police were totally against all the proposals that were on the ballot, people still voted for it, and they've pretty much cracked down on freedom in California. I'm a really big fan of yours. I don't think people understand how difficult it is to do your job, to take 3 hours and make it so entertaining. And I really appreciate all the hard work that you do.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. The situation, you live in Santa Cruz, that's just got to be frustrating as hell. I mean, here you have an effort to actually get rid of illegal immigrant gang members, and even the cops protested.
Yeah, the police here are really, really good. I had a personal tragedy and got to know some of the detective sergeants in the sheriff's department pretty well. And they are.
Well, California really just is so deeply left. It's particularly coastal. It just is. So I went and looked at the Santa Cruz, the Mercury News, the newspaper out there, the article here, they were chanting, "Let us speak." Some 100 or more protesters drew a temporary halt to Tuesday's Santa Cruz City Council meeting. The group came together in an outcry at the previous day's U.S. Department of Homeland Security raids across the county. The federal operation, undertaken in collaboration with local law enforcement, resulted in a series of arrests at 12 sites. Federal indictments of 10 men, ages 20 to 40, believed to be associated with Mara Salvatrucha, or MS-13, transnational gang. The men face charges related to conspiracy to commit extortion and possess methamphetamine, crystal blue persuasion, with intent to distribute, with some suspected involvement in local homicides, according to police. And this is caller's point, people protesting the rounding up of these people. And he lives there. What are we going to do? I mean, we got these bad actors in town. We got international gang members. And Homeland Security comes in to sweep them off and get them out of town and so forth. And the town people and even some police protest the action. Now, yes, I could explain it, except that I have so many times, and I want to move on. We've got Steve in Manhattan Beach, California. Great that you called, sir. Welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. An extraordinary honor to talk to you. I am 67 years old, and I was born and raised in Greenwich Village, New York. Went to school at the Little Red Schoolhouse, a lily-white private school, during the height of the McCarthy period. So my
Wait. Eugene or Joseph McCarthy?
Oh, Joseph McCarthy.
Joseph
I'm
McCarthy.
67, yes.
Oh, okay.
Eugene, I was in New Hampshire for that winter, but
okay.
No. What I wanted to say, Rush, is that Donald Trump was someone who was on my radar as a New Yorker back in the 70s, and he was sort of a clownish figure to me, who I completely ignored and never have watched an episode of The Apprentice or any of those other things. But I truly believe, Rush, that we are witnessing what I am now starting to call Donaldus Maximus. I think this man is truly going to save this country. I feel that my grown children now have an opportunity to live in the kind of limitless republic that I was fortunate enough to be born into in the 50s and 60s and so on. So I just wanted to ask if you feel that we can begin to call him that.
Donaldus Maximus. Before I answer that, can I ask you what really brought about the change of heart? I mean, I moved to New York in 1984. Is that right? No, 88. In 1988. And I was there when Marla Maples thing happened, and Trump on the front page, smiling ear to ear with Marla Maples having been quoted saying, greatest sex I've ever had. Cindy Adams was the local Donald Trump expert. Cindy Adams knew what Donald Trump's going to do before Trump did it, because I think Trump called and told her. And he was a character then. He was a larger than life character then. And I actually got to know him shortly after moving there. It's a long story, but Al D'Amato called him to ask him to show me an apartment in Trump Tower, and that's how I got. That's how I got it. And you were there in years prior to that, and you've always thought him kind of he's a funny guy, joke, didn't take him seriously. What changed? I mean, even after his campaign began, you probably weren't on board. What changed?
Well, that's true. I was a Cruz supporter, and I just, in watching this man evolve, and truly, to me, even in the 26 or 7 odd days he's been president, it's almost breathtaking to watch the evolution as he begins to understand fully what he's up against and what he has the power to accomplish. And
you're not worried about any of the press criticism. You're not that hasn't served to weaken your resolve in the game.
I think I watch on Facebook. Most of my friends. I've lived in California now for 40 years, but most of my friends still live in Greenwich Village and are hair on fire Democrats who think that the world the Henny Penny crowd is just beyond any kind of reasonable behavior. But no, I'm not worried about that, because I really believe that he is taking the measure of this country and really understands how desperate the situation has become.
Thank you, because I think this is pretty close to what your average Trump voter thinks. Now, let's talk about Trump voters for just a second. Let me ask all of you a question. What's the number of votes Trump got? Is that 60? Okay, 63 million. And what percentage of the vote did he get? 46, 48? I forget what it was. But are all 63, is it 63 million, did you say? I don't care, 60, 65, we've got a ballpark number. Are all of them just dyed in the wool, pedal to the metal Trump supporters? Or are some of them the kind of people that just hated Hillary, and there was no way, no matter what, and Trump was the alternate choice? In other words, What percentage or what number of that 65 million do you think are all in Trump, love Trump, go into the rallies, think Trump's the answer, can do no wrong, media, they don't care what the media, what percentage of the Trump? You think it's less than half. Mr. Snerdley weighing in thinks it's less than half. So you think that of the 60, let's use the number 60 million that voted for Trump, let's just say 32 million are not that crazy about him. Still waiting. So you don't think they're disappointed? You don't. Oh, so you think of the... Oh, interesting. I would have expected you to say that the 32 million that were really not crazy about Trump, they were more anti-Hillary, are now really scared and worried. This is not at all. Oh, my God, this is embarrassing. You think Trump is growing them. You think Trump's growing so that number of percentage of 60 million that voted for him, it's getting closer and closer to all of them being all in. Oh, I do. I had that question the other day. Remember, I had this guy on the phone. He said his liberal friends in California told him if the election were held today, there's no question Hillary would win. She'd win in a landslide. Trump would even get 30% of the vote. And I told this guy, I said, you tell your friends, you tell them that I said so. You tell them if the election were held today, Trump would win by an even bigger margin. He'd win over 400 electoral votes, and Hillary would barely even show it. You tell them that I said so. And he said, oh, right. Oh, because he was worried. His friends were telling him he was afraid that was the attitude of a lot of people. And this is why, here's this guy on the phone here from Manhattan Beach, former New Yorker, and he doesn't care about any of my point. The media has this way. It's a formulaic blueprint for destroying politicians they don't like. Most of them are Republican. Occasionally, there will be a Bob Torricelli that they go after. But for the most part, they have a blueprint and a formula for destroying Republicans. And it always works. If they may not get them out of Washington, but they'll get them out of positions of power. They'll take a speaker and get rid of him and make him a Fox News consultant. They'll take another congressman, get him resigning in shame or what, or they'll take a president and they'll turn public opinion against him. His approval numbers are 35. They've got a blueprint for doing this. And the blueprint relies on a wide universe of the American people believing what they see in the media. And whenever these narratives build and they just catch the wave of momentum and inertia, there's no resisting it. But Trump doesn't fit the blueprint. Trump doesn't fit the formula. The media doesn't know how to take him out. And I'm going to tell you what I think. I think the more of this stuff they try, the more it's going to backfire on them. Folks, they've been doing this since last summer. They've been doing this 15 months. They've been doing this. If the Access Hollywood video didn't do it, what do they think they've got that will? A bunch of Obama holdovers at the CIA saying that Trump worked with Putin to screw Hillary? What they don't get is it doesn't matter how Hillary was defeated. That's acceptable. If Hillary Clinton represented, this country's over to the people that voted. And they're never going to understand this. The people in the media, in Washington, in the establishment, I mean, go back before the presidential campaign. You know, how often do we talk about it here, that real frustration we had with Republicans in Washington was they didn't see any crisis out there. They didn't see any death spiral the country was in. They thought we were kooks. They thought we were nuts believing in conspiracies. And yet, the people living out in the country, they're not protected by all the economic security and other kind of security inside Washington, New York, Boston, or whatever. I mean, living it every day. They see it happening every day, and they see the people responsible for it continuing to add to what was doing irreparable damage, largely opening the borders of this country to non-citizens, putting them on the welfare rolls and calling it immigration. That just sent them over the edge. And they said, we're going to lose the country if we don't get a hold on our immigration laws and enforce them, and if we don't start assimilating people. And they saw official Washington, totally uninterested in any of that. And we voiced these concerns to Republicans and others in Washington. They, behind their backs, laugh. These guys really think there's a crisis out there. And they thought it was a joke. And they thought it was people having an overreaction. So I tell you, the disconnect here is wide. There's not much linking the disconnect. I mean, there's very little commonality for there to even be a bridge between these two disconnects. And I just think the more the media uses their time-honored blueprint techniques to destroy Republican politicians, it hasn't worked on Trump yet, and they've been trying it a year and a half, folks. I mean, we're dangerously close here to the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. And it's not Trump who's insane. Trump's having a time of his life. I mean, and that's another thing they can't accept. I meant to talk about it. Fox just did a little segment on the back and forth Trump and April Ryan yesterday at the press conference, where she asked him if he was going to have the CBC come to whatever he's going to do on reviving the inner cities. And Trump said, well, hey, you know him, you can set up the meeting. And everybody's saying, that's racist, that's racist. He said that because she's black, and therefore they're black, and he knows that she knows them. And therefore, I'm sorry, it isn't going to fly, media. You can't get, that might work on somebody like Ted Cruz. It might work on any other Republican, but not going to work on Trump. Nobody who saw that thought it was racial. They thought it was funny. There's a journalist, and you want to set up the meeting? I'd love to meet him. You want to? And of course, the Congressional Black Caucasians, they said, well, we sent you a letter and you didn't respond to it. And the White House, well, we remember you boycotted the inauguration. Let's not forget that. Congressional Black Caucasians didn't go to the inauguration. Anyway, nobody saw racism. I'm going to tell you, I think a lot of people started to right. A lot of people who saw that press conference, and not big-time Trumpers, loved it for a whole host of reasons. Here is Donna in Vernon, Connecticut. Welcome to the EIB Network. Hi.
Hey, Raj. First time for me. My sister Vanessa was on once, though. And I think you're lulling your listeners into a false sense of security. I think what Hillary Clinton said is true, and that is that the future is female. Imagine the intellectual level of the lefties, and I'm a member of the ladies of the left, and we've assigned a sex to the future. In other words, she declared the future was female, and in fact it is. This Trump thing is nothing but a hiccup. In other words, we had the...
Wait, did you say you're a lady of the left?
Yes, it's an active organization. It's part of the Ferris and Friends on LinkedIn.
Okay. Well, I have news for you. The world's always been run by women.
Yeah, but now
yes, it is
to a new level.
No, in civilized society, women have the ultimate power. It's women who say no. In civilized society, that's what you feminists have never understood. You've always run the show. Ask any husband. You have always run the show. Anyway, this is not a blip. It's not a blip. This is a 180. Turning the ship. And it's not anymore women and children first in the lifeboats. Back after this. Okay, remember, folks, I'm going to venture out on television over the weekend. I'll be on Fox News Sunday, live at 9 Eastern on the Fox Broadcast Network with Chris Wallace. It's aired later in the day a couple of times on the Fox News channel, but it's live at 9 a.m. Eastern. Check local listings for when it's on in your area. And have a wonderful weekend. We will be back here on Monday on President's Day. Another Monday holiday. We do